Tasha tightened her grip on the handle of her suitcase as her younger brother slammed his duffel bag into the back of her SUV. "What are you doing?" she asked, forcing a laugh that sounded strange even to her own ears. "Kyle, mine goes there." Kyle shrugged without looking at her. "Dad said I'd need the space." Need the space? Before Tasha could make sense of it, the front door opened. Her father, Harold Bennett, stepped onto the porch with a satisfied smile, while her mother followed behind, adjusting the scarf Tasha had bought her specifically for this trip. Harold clapped Kyle on the shoulder. "We've made a little change of plans." Tasha frowned. "What kind of change?" Linda spoke first. "Honey, don't make this difficult." The words landed before the explanation. Harold folded his arms. "We decided Kyle should come with us instead." Silence. Tasha searched each face, waiting for someone to laugh and admit it was a joke. Nobody did. "I don't understand," she finally said. "I planned this trip for us." Harold smiled, as though he were explaining something obvious to a child. "He needed the break more than you." The sentence settled over the driveway like concrete. No apology. No thank you. No offer to pay her back. Just an expectation that she would quietly hand over the vacation she'd spent 8 months building. Across the street, a neighbor paused while walking her dog, glancing toward the growing tension. Kyle zipped his jacket. "We're going to miss our flight." Tasha looked from her parents to the luggage, realizing everyone except her already knew this decision had been made. And somehow, she had been the last person told. She bent down, lifted her own suitcase out of the cargo area, closed the hatch with a quiet click, and simply nodded. "All right," she said softly. None of them noticed the calm that replaced the hurt on her face. Or wondered why. 8 months earlier, the idea had seemed perfect. Their 40th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Tasha wanted to give her parents something they had always dreamed about but never believed they could afford: a 10-day luxury tour across Italy. Business-class flights, 5-star hotels, private vineyard tastings in Tuscany, a gondola dinner in Venice, a guided tour through Rome before finishing on the Amalfi Coast. She had worked overtime, skipped weekends away with friends, and quietly transferred part of every paycheck into a separate savings account until she had enough to pay for every detail. She never told her parents how much she'd sacrificed. She wanted the surprise to matter more than the price tag. When she finally presented them with the itinerary 2 months earlier, Linda burst into tears. Harold hugged her tighter than he had in years. "You've given us something we'll never forget," he'd said. Those words echoed painfully now as he locked the front door and walked past her toward the SUV. Kyle slid into the passenger seat without hesitation. Linda stopped beside Tasha. "You know your brother's been having a rough time." Tasha met her mother's eyes. "I've been paying for his rough time for 2 years." Linda sighed impatiently. "And that's exactly why we knew you'd understand." Understand. The word stung more than the decision itself. Responsible. Reliable. Understanding. Those labels had followed Tasha her entire adult life. Whenever Kyle lost another job. Whenever he couldn't pay rent. Whenever he needed just a little help. Someone always turned toward Tasha. She was never asked. She was expected. Harold cleared his throat from behind the steering wheel. "Come on, we don't have all morning." Without another word, Tasha climbed into the driver's seat. The airport was 45 minutes away. Kyle chatted about Italian food, as though nothing unusual had happened. Linda discussed museums she couldn't wait to visit. Harold complained about airport parking prices. No one mentioned the thousands of dollars sitting inside the trip they had just taken away from the person who paid for every cent. When they reached the departure terminal, Tasha unloaded their luggage onto the curb. Linda hugged her quickly. "Thank you for understanding." Harold nodded once. "We'll bring you something nice." Kyle grinned. I'll send pictures. Tasha smiled politely. I hope you all have a wonderful trip. Her calm expression seemed to puzzle them. Harold hesitated for a second, almost expecting an argument that never came. Instead, Tasha watched them disappear through the sliding glass doors. Only after they vanished into the security line did she unlock her phone. She made one brief call. Everything's set, she said. Then she ended the call, started her SUV, and drove away. Thousands of miles later, when their plane touched down in Italy, every one of them was about to discover that replacing the person who planned the journey wasn't nearly as simple as they believed. While the airport disappeared behind her in the rearview mirror, the silence inside Tasha's SUV felt unfamiliar. Normally, after doing something generous for her family, her phone would already be buzzing with grateful messages. Instead, it vibrated with a cheerful text from her mother. Linda, thanks again for driving us. Don't forget to water my orchids while we're gone. Not one word about replacing her. Not one acknowledgement that the woman who had paid for the vacation was now driving home alone. Tasha stared at the message at a red light, then set the phone face down without replying. A few hours later, she met her longtime friends, Mia and Rachel, for a lunch that had originally been planned as a celebration before her trip. The moment Tasha walked into the cafe alone, both women stood. Wait, Mia frowned. Why aren't you at the airport by now? Tasha managed a small smile. My parents decided Kyle needed Italy more than I did. Neither friend spoke for several seconds. Rachel finally whispered, what? Tasha calmly explained everything. The driveway, Harold's smile, Kyle taking her place, and the sentence she couldn't stop hearing. He needed the break more than you. Mia slowly put down her coffee. So they seriously expected you to hand over a vacation you paid for. Tasha nodded once. They didn't even offer to reimburse me. Rachel shook her head. They've always expected you to clean up Kyle's life. Tasha didn't argue. She couldn't. Because it was true. She remembered paying Kyle's overdue rent after he lost another job. Covering his car insurance because her parents couldn't manage another emergency. Skipping a vacation with friends the previous summer because Kyle suddenly needed help with medical bills. Every time she'd hesitated, Harold always gave the same answer. You're stronger than your brother. Back then, she'd accepted those words as praise. Now she realized they had always been permission to ask more of her. Rachel suddenly leaned forward. Hold on. Tasha looked up. Weren't all the airline tickets and hotel reservations booked under your account? A faint smile crossed Tasha's face for the first time that day. She picked up her glass of water instead of answering. Changing the subject, she asked if either friend wanted dessert. Neither of them missed the look she had just given. Just as lunch ended, Tasha's phone buzzed again. Harold, where are the hotel confirmation emails? I can't seem to find them. She typed only one sentence. Everything will make sense after you arrive. Less than a minute later, another message appeared. Harold, what exactly do you mean by after arrival? The flight landed in Rome just after sunrise. Stretching after the long journey, Harold smiled as travelers streamed toward baggage claim. See, he said confidently, everything worked out. Kyle adjusted his sunglasses and grinned. I told you she'd get over it. Outside the terminal, a sharply dressed chauffeur stood beside a black luxury sedan, holding a tablet with a single name displayed in bold letters. Tasha. Harold walked straight toward him. We're the Bennett family. The driver smiled politely. Welcome to Rome. May I see Ms. Tasha Bennett, please? Harold pointed toward Linda and Kyle. She's not traveling. We're her family. The driver's smile faded. I'm very sorry, sir. This transfer has been prepaid for one specific reservation. The booking requires Ms. Bennett to be present. Harold chuckled. There must be some mistake. The driver checked his tablet again. There is no mistake, sir. I cannot release the vehicle without the primary guest. He apologized once more, climbed into the sedan, and drove away. Kyle stared after the disappearing car. Seriously. An hour later, carrying their luggage through the lobby of the luxury hotel Tasha had described so excitedly months earlier, Harold approached the front desk with growing irritation. We have a reservation. The receptionist smiled warmly. Certainly, may I have the primary guest's passport? Harold Bennett. She searched the system. I have a reservation under Tasha Bennett. She's my daughter. I understand, sir. The receptionist remained courteous as she continued checking the booking. Unfortunately, this reservation is attached to the primary traveler. Without Ms. Bennett checking in personally, I cannot activate the stay. Linda leaned across the counter. We're her parents. She paid for this anniversary trip. I don't doubt that, ma'am. However, the reservation terms cannot be transferred without prior authorization. A concierge joined them, hopping to help. After reviewing the documents, he gently reached the same conclusion. I'm terribly sorry. Luxury travel packages like yours, including transportation, hotel accommodations, and private excursions, must be activated by the original booking guest. Several nearby guests glanced toward the increasingly tense conversation. Kyle's patience snapped. So you're telling me you've got empty rooms, and you won't let us into one because of a name? The manager stepped forward calmly. This is not about a room, sir. It is about ownership of the travel contract. Harold's confident expression disappeared. For the first time, he realized they had never actually possessed the vacation. They had only assumed they did. His hands trembling slightly, Harold dialed Tasha. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. Linda tried next. Nothing. Finally, Harold sent a text. Call me immediately. Several minutes later, Tasha replied with a single message. I hope Kyle enjoys the break. Kyle read the screen over his father's shoulder. His face flushed with anger. Without another word, he pulled out Harold's credit card and marched toward another hotel across the street. I'm booking something, he snapped. We're not sleeping in the airport. The first surprise came before sunset. Harold stared at the receipt the replacement hotel receptionist handed him. He blinked twice. There has to be a mistake. The receptionist shook her head sympathetically. Unfortunately, sir, this is today's last-minute rate. Kyle leaned over the counter. That's almost 3 times what my sister booked. I'm afraid prices increase significantly for same-day reservations. Harold reluctantly handed over his credit card. The terminal beeped. Approved. Linda watched the total appear on the screen and whispered, We were never supposed to pay for any of this. No one answered. The next morning only made things worse. The private driver, scheduled to take them through Tuscany, had already departed. Their prepaid winery experience was marked as a no-show. The guided Vatican tour could not be transferred. The evening gondola dinner in Venice remained reserved under Tasha's name. One by one, every luxury experience disappeared. Kyle slammed his phone onto the cafe table. This is ridiculous. She should have fixed this already. Linda looked exhausted. She didn't create this problem. Kyle stared at her. What? You heard me. It was the first time, during the trip, she hadn't defended him. Back home, Tasha sat in her office leading a video meeting. Her coworkers noticed nothing unusual. When the meeting ended, her phone immediately lit up. Missed call Dad. Missed call Mom asterisk. Voicemail Kyle. She listened to only one. Harold's voice sounded nothing like it had at the airport. Tasha, call us. We just need to straighten this out. She deleted the voicemail without replying. For years, she had interrupted her own life, every time Kyle's latest crisis became the family's emergency. Today, she finished her coffee while reviewing project reports. For the first time, someone else's poor decision wasn't becoming her responsibility. 3 days into the trip, Harold vented his frustration online. Luxury travel companies should treat families better instead of hiding behind policies. He expected sympathy. Instead, a longtime family friend commented beneath the post. "Didn't your daughter pay for the entire vacation? Why wasn't she there?" Another relative added, "Wait, you replaced the person who bought the trip." Within hours, cousins, aunts, and old family friends began asking the same question. The conversation quickly stopped being about hotels. It became about favoritism. Harold found himself explaining the sentence he'd spoken so casually in the driveway. Kyle needed the break more. Written on a screen, it sounded far worse than it had in his own head. Linda quietly set down her phone. "I don't think this is Tasha embarrassing us." Harold looked at her. "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we embarrassed ourselves." The remaining days in Italy were filled with arguments. Kyle complained about every replacement hotel. He criticized the restaurants. He blamed delayed trains, crowded museums, and expensive taxis on everyone except himself. Finally, after another bitter argument outside a restaurant in Florence, Linda stopped walking. "Kyle." He turned. "You kept saying your sister should fix everything." She shook her head slowly. "We're the ones who taught you to expect that." Kyle had no response. For the first time during the trip, even he looked away. When their return flight touched down back home 10 days later, Harold switched on his phone before the seatbelt sign was off. A notification appeared almost instantly. Automatic payment update. Monthly transfer to Kyle Bennett, canceled. Below it was a short message from Tasha. "Beginning this month, I'll no longer be providing financial support for expenses that aren't mine. I wish you all the best." Harold stared silently at the screen as the passengers around him began standing to collect their luggage. Harold didn't call Tasha that evening. Neither did Linda. For the first time in years, the Bennett family sat in complete silence. Kyle disappeared into his apartment without asking anyone for money. Harold remained at the kitchen table, staring at the cancellation notice on his phone. Only then did he begin piecing everything together. The chauffeur, the hotel, the tour, the restaurants, the transportation. None of it had been canceled. Nothing had been sabotaged. Every reservation had functioned exactly as it was supposed to. He had simply assumed that because Tasha had paid for everything, she could be replaced without consequence. He had never bothered to ask how the trip had actually been arranged. 2 days later, Harold called Tasha and asked if they could meet. She agreed. Not because she felt obligated, because she wanted the conversation to happen on her terms. They met at a quiet coffee shop halfway between their homes. Harold looked older than she remembered. Linda sat beside him, unusually quiet. After several awkward moments, Harold finally spoke. "I owe you an apology." Tasha waited. "I thought, because you always handled everything, that it wouldn't matter if Kyle went instead." He lowered his eyes. "I expected you to absorb the loss like you always have." Linda's voice trembled. "When we landed and everything started falling apart, I kept thinking you'd somehow fix it." She paused. "And then I realized, you've been fixing our mistakes for years." Tasha wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I never canceled your vacation." Harold nodded. "I know. You chose to replace the only person every reservation belonged to." "I know. I didn't embarrass you." Harold swallowed. "We embarrassed ourselves." No one argued. There wasn't anything left to defend. Kyle arrived 20 minutes late. He didn't apologize. Instead, He looked directly at Tasha. You could have helped us. She met his gaze calmly. I could have. The silence stretched between them. But why would I? Kyle opened his mouth before closing it again. For perhaps the first time in his life, nobody rushed in to rescue him from the consequences of his own choices. Linda looked at her son. She's right. Kyle stared at his mother in disbelief. You've spent years expecting your sister to solve problems you created. Tears formed in Linda's eyes. We helped create that expectation. Kyle quietly stood. Without another word, he walked out of the cafe. No one followed him. Harold reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check. It wasn't enough to cover every dollar Tasha had spent, but it represented every penny Harold and Linda could realistically repay without borrowing. I know this doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't, Tasha answered honestly. But thank you for trying. Harold nodded. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. They won't. For the first time, neither of them treated that as a threat. It was simply the truth. Over the following months, the changes became permanent. Tasha closed the joint emergency account her parents had always relied on. She stopped paying Kyle's rent. She no longer covered surprise bills, overdue insurance payments, or last-minute family emergencies. When relatives called asking why, Harold answered before Tasha ever had to. Because we took advantage of her generosity for too long. No one argued after hearing those words from him. Kyle eventually accepted a full-time job. Not because he suddenly wanted one. Because there was finally no one left willing to finance his excuses. Slowly, conversations with Tasha changed. Her parents stopped calling only when they needed something. Instead, they invited her to dinner. They asked about her work. They listened instead of expecting. Trust didn't return overnight. But respect did. 6 months later, Tasha boarded another flight to Italy. This time, she traveled with Mia and Rachel. As the three friends stood on a quiet terrace overlooking the Amalfi coast, Rachel smiled. Funny. What is? The first trip you paid for, you never got to enjoy. Tasha looked out across the blue water sparkling beneath the afternoon sun. No. She smiled peacefully. But this one. She took a slow breath. I actually earned. For the first time in years, her generosity belonged to someone who appreciated it. Herself.